A heartwarming story of a woman who invites a homeless man to dinner, but has no idea how he will influence her life. It was a sunny morning when Fernanda, a 68-year-old woman, left her home with her usual smile and a basket of fresh fruit. Her small, cozy home had a garden filled with colorful flowers that she tended to lovingly. Fernanda wore her blue apron, a gift from her granddaughter, and walked with firm steps towards the community soup kitchen. This daily walk was a ritual that filled her with joy and purpose. Upon arriving at the soup kitchen, Fernanda was greeted with warm hugs and smiles. "Good morning, Mrs. Fernanda," exclaimed Julia, a young volunteer. "Good morning, my dear," responded Fernanda, her eyes shining. She loved this environment, where she could feel the gratitude and affection of the people she helped. "Shall we start preparing lunch?" she suggested, already rolling up her sleeves. Fernanda headed to the kitchen, where the ingredients were scattered across the countertops. "Today we'll make a hearty vegetable soup," she said, as she began chopping the carrots. Next to her, Carlos, a longtime volunteer, commented, "You have a blessed hand for cooking, Fernanda." She smiled humbly. "It's the love I put into each dish, Carlos." While the soup simmered in the large pot, Fernanda took the opportunity to chat with some of the regulars. "How are you today, Mrs. Maria?" she asked a woman who always came accompanied by her young grandson. "Better now, with this warm soup," replied Mrs. Maria, with a shy smile. Fernanda knew that for many of these people, this dish was more than just food, it was a gesture of hope and care. The hall was bustling with activity. People came and went, all seeking a hot meal and a bit of comfort. Fernanda observed everything with a keen eye and an open heart. "Have you seen João today?" she asked Carlos. "Not yet, but he usually shows up later," he replied. João was one of the many homeless individuals who frequented the soup kitchen, and Fernanda always worried about his well-being. During the break, Fernanda sat down for a moment to rest. "You never stop, do you, Fernanda?" joked Julia. "Ah, my dear, when you do what you love, you don't even feel the fatigue," she replied, already getting up to fetch more bread from the pantry. Fernanda's energy and dedication were contagious, inspiring all those around her. Fernanda also had a special ability to listen. Often, people would come to her not only for the soup, but to unburden themselves. "You know, Fernanda, I'm going through some difficult times," confessed Anna, a young mother. "I understand, my dear. Count on me for whatever you need," said Fernanda, firmly holding Anna's hands. The clock struck noon when the line for the soup began to form. Fernanda, ladle in hand, served each plate with a smile and a word of encouragement. "Here you are, Mr. Jose. Enjoy the soup," she said to one of the regular guests. "Thank you, Mrs. Fernanda. You are an angel," he responded, visibly moved. These moments were worth more than any material reward. At the end of the day, after serving over 100 plates, Fernanda was exhausted but happy. "Another successful day," commented Carlos, as he cleaned the tables. "Yes, Carlos. It's gratifying to see everyone leaving here with a smile on their face," she replied, sighing with satisfaction. The work was hard, but the emotional return was immense. As Fernanda left the community soup kitchen, she felt the fresh wind on her face and looked up at the sky, thanking God for another day of service. "See you all tomorrow," she waved goodbye to her colleagues. Walking back home, she was thinking about new recipes and ways to improve the service. Her mind never stopped working for the benefit of others. Arriving home, Fernanda was greeted by the affection of her cats, who were purring around her. "Hello, my loves," she said, petting them. She sat down in the living room armchair and reflected on the day. Each story, each smile, each shared tear was part of her routine. And it was this routine that gave meaning to her life, filling her with joy and purpose. Fernanda fell asleep with a smile on her face, eager for the next day. Fernanda arrived early at the community soup kitchen that morning, excited for another day of work. As she entered the kitchen, she was startled to see bags and more bags of food being thrown away. "What's happening here?" she asked Julia, anxiously. "They said it's food that couldn't be used," the young woman replied, embarrassed. Fernanda felt a lump in her throat. "But that's outrageous. There are people going hungry out there," she exclaimed, indignant. Determined not to let this slide, she went straight to the administration office. She knocked firmly on the door and, when greeted, immediately said, "We need to talk about the food waste." In the office, the administrator, Mr. Augusto, seemed annoyed by Fernanda's presence. "What do you want, Fernanda?" he asked, without looking up from his papers. "Mr. Augusto, we can't keep throwing away so much good food. This is a disrespect to those in need," she said, trying to stay calm. But he didn't seem fazed. "Fernanda, we have rules here. If the food doesn't meet the standards, it has to be discarded," he responded, dryly. "But we can find a solution. This is an unacceptable waste," Fernanda insisted, her voice trembling with emotion. Mr. Augusto, impatient, looked her in the eye. "If you're not satisfied with the way we do things, maybe this place isn't for you." Fernanda left the office with her head held high, but with a heavy heart. She couldn't believe that instead of solving the problem, they were willing to ignore her concern. When she returned to the kitchen, she found Julia. "And what happened?" the young woman asked anxiously. "I was fired, Julia." "They don't want to hear the truth," Fernanda replied with a sigh. The news of Fernanda's dismissal quickly spread among the volunteers and regulars of the soup kitchen. Mrs. Maria, one of the beneficiaries, approached her with tears in her eyes. "What will we do without you, Fernanda?" she asked, holding her hands. "I don't know, Mrs. Maria. But I'll find a way to keep helping," Fernanda promised, her heart heavy. As she left the soup kitchen for the last time, Fernanda looked back and saw all those people who needed so much help. She felt a mix of sadness and outrage. "This isn't going to end like this," she thought, determined. Walking through the streets, she began to think of alternatives to continue her volunteer work, even without being at the soup kitchen. At home, Fernanda sat down in her favorite armchair and let the tears roll down her cheeks. "What am I going to do now?" she asked herself. Her cat snuggled up beside her, offering silent comfort. She knew she couldn't give up, but at that moment, she felt completely lost. She needed a plan, and fast. The next day, while sipping her coffee, Fernanda received an unexpected visit. It was Carlos, one of the volunteers from the soup kitchen. "I heard about what happened. I can't believe they fired you for trying to do the right thing," he said, indignant. "Well, Carlos. But I'll find a way to keep helping," Fernanda responded, determined. Carlos offered to help Fernanda find a new way to support the community. "You're not alone in this, Fernanda. We'll figure it out," he said, with an encouraging smile. Together, They began planning ways to continue serving meals to those in need, even outside the soup kitchen. Fernanda felt a glimmer of hope start to rekindle. With the help of Carlos and other friends, Fernanda began to envision new possibilities. "Maybe we can organize something at my house, at least temporarily," she suggested. "That's right, Fernanda. We'll make it work," Carlos agreed. And so, even in the face of adversity, Fernanda began to chart a new path to continue doing what she loved most, helping others. Fernanda was on her way home, still reflecting on the injustice she had witnessed at the soup kitchen. As she walked, she spotted Carlos, a homeless man who frequented the place. He was sitting on a bench, with a lost look in his eyes. Fernanda felt a pang in her heart and decided to approach him. "Hi, Carlos. How are you doing today?" she asked, with a gentle smile. Carlos lifted his head and immediately recognized her. "Hello, Mrs. Fernanda. I'm surviving, as always," he responded, with a sad smile. Fernanda sat down beside him, wanting to learn more about him. "You didn't show up at the soup kitchen today," Fernanda commented, trying to start a conversation. "Yeah, I heard what happened to you." "A great injustice," Carlos said, with a sigh. Fernanda nodded, still feeling the pain of her dismissal. "It was a hard blow, but life goes on. And you, Carlos? How have you been?" Carlos hesitated for a moment before responding. "It's been tough, Mrs. Fernanda. Every day is a struggle. But we keep going," he said, with a melancholic gaze. Fernanda felt a wave of compassion and decided to do something to help. "Carlos, why don't you come have dinner at my house tonight? We can talk more and see how I can help you," she suggested. Carlos was surprised by the invitation and, at first, hesitated. "I don't want to bother you, Mrs. Fernanda," he said, looking down at the ground. "You won't be a bother, Carlos. I insist. It will be good for both of us," Fernanda responded, with an encouraging smile. After a moment of silence, Carlos finally accepted. As they walked together to Fernanda's house, she tried to lighten the mood. "You're going to love my stew. It's the house specialty," she joked. Carlos smiled, feeling a bit more at ease. "I'm sure it will be delicious, Mrs. Fernanda. Thank you for the invitation," he said, grateful. Arriving at Fernanda's house, Carlos was impressed by the cozy atmosphere of the place. "Your home is very beautiful, Mrs. Fernanda," he commented, admiring the blooming garden. "Thank you, Carlos. Make yourself at home," she responded, as she guided him to the kitchen. "I'll prepare something special for us," she said, starting to gather the ingredients. While Fernanda cooked, Carlos watched quietly, feeling welcomed in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Can I help with anything?" he asked, wanting to be useful. "Of course, you can chop these vegetables for me," Fernanda replied, handing him a knife and a cutting board. They worked together, conversing about life. During dinner, Fernanda wanted to learn more about Carlos. "Tell me more about yourself, Carlos. How did you end up in this situation?" she asked, with genuine interest. Carlos sighed and began to tell his story. "I was a businessman, you know. I had a good life, but a scam took everything away from me," he revealed, with sadness in his eyes. Fernanda listened attentively, feeling a deep empathy for Carlos. "It must have been very difficult for you," she commented, touching his hand in a gesture of support. "It was, Mrs. Fernanda. but hearing your story gives me hope. You're an amazing person, he said, moved. Fernanda smiled, feeling a special connection to him. After dinner, Fernanda offered Carlos a place to stay for the night, but he politely declined. Thank you, Mrs. Fernanda, but I prefer to go back to my corner. I'm used to it, he said, standing up. I understand, Carlos. But know that my door will always be open for you, she responded, giving him a warm hug. Carlos said goodbye, feeling lighter than he had in many years. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Fernanda. You've done more for me today than you can imagine, he said, with a sincere smile. It was my pleasure, Carlos. Take care and come back whenever you need, she replied, watching him leave. Fernanda knew that this unexpected encounter was just the beginning of something greater. As she closed the door and prepared for bed, Fernanda reflected on the day. She felt rejuvenated, with a new mission, to help Carlos get back on his feet. Determined, she promised herself that she would do everything in her power to make a difference in his life. As they savored the stew prepared by Fernanda, the silence in the room was filled with the sound of utensils and a slight air of expectation. Fernanda decided to break the ice. Carlos, tell me more about yourself. How did you end up in this situation? Carlos took a deep breath, as if preparing to unearth painful memories. I was a businessman, Mrs. Fernanda. I had an import-export company. Things were going well, my family and I were living comfortably, he began, with a distant gaze. But then, one day, I fell victim to a financial scam. I lost everything overnight, he continued, his voice trembling. Fernanda listened attentively, her eyes fixed on Carlos. My goodness, Carlos, that must have been terrible, she said with empathy. It was, Mrs. Fernanda. A business partner embezzled all the money and fled. I was left with nothing, not even to pay the household bills, he revealed, shaking his head in despair as he remembered. Carlos continued, the sadness evident in his voice. My wife couldn't handle the pressure and left us. I tried to start over, but the debts kept piling up. I ended up losing the house and everything we had, he recounted, his eyes welling up. Fernanda felt her heart ache as she heard his story. I had no idea you had gone through all of that, Carlos, Fernanda said, touching his hand on the table. And how did you end up on the streets? She asked delicately. After I lost the house, I had nowhere to go. I started sleeping in shelters and, when I couldn't get a spot, on the streets, Carlos explained. That's so unfair. You were a businessman, with a stable life, and suddenly, everything crumbled, Fernanda commented, indignant. Yes, Mrs. Fernanda. Life can be pretty cruel sometimes, Carlos responded, shrugging. But hearing your story and seeing your compassion gives me a glimmer of hope, he added, with a slight smile. Fernanda was touched by Carlos' words. You know, Carlos, I'm also going through a difficult time, but we need to support each other, she said. Together, we can find a way for you to get back on your feet, she promised with determination. Carlos looked at her, surprised and grateful. Would you really do that for me, Mrs. Fernanda? He asked. Of course, Carlos. No one deserves to be in this situation. Let's think of a plan to help you get back into the job market, Fernanda said, with a spark in her eyes. I don't even know where to start, Mrs. Fernanda, he confessed, with a sigh. We'll figure it out together, Carlos. I promise, she replied, with an encouraging smile. The conversation continued for some time, filled with renewed plans and hopes. Maybe we can start with something simple, like getting your documents back and looking for job opportunities, Fernanda suggested. That would be a great start. I really need help with the documents, Carlos agreed, excited. Fernanda felt like she had found a new mission. Let's do this, Carlos. Tomorrow, we'll start working on it, she said, determined. Thank you, Mrs. Fernanda. You have no idea how much this means to me, Carlos said, moved. It's going to be all right, you'll see, she responded, confident. As they said their goodbyes, Fernanda felt a new wave of purpose. You can always count on me, Carlos. We'll get through this together, she said, with a warm hug. I believe in you, Mrs. Fernanda. Thank you for everything, he replied, with a sincere smile. And so, with the promise of a new beginning, they set off on their respective journeys, hope filling their hearts. In the following days, Fernanda and Carlos began to work tirelessly on the action plan. They gathered at her house, spreading papers and documents across the kitchen table. First, we need to understand exactly how the scam happened, Fernanda said, focused. Carlos, do you have any documentation from the company that could help us? I have some old records and emails that I managed to save, Carlos replied, pulling a worn folder from his backpack. Great, that's a start, Fernanda said, flipping through the papers. Let's start putting together a timeline of events to see if we can find any clues. Carlos nodded, feeling a new sense of hope growing. As they analyzed the documents, they discovered several suspicious transfers made by Carlos' former business partner. Look here. These transactions were to accounts overseas, Fernanda pointed out, excited. Yes, he started diverting the money months before I realized it, Carlos confirmed, frustrated. But now we have a trail to follow, Fernanda said, determined. Day by day, Fernanda and Carlos became more immersed in the investigation. We need professional help to trace those accounts, Fernanda suggested. I know a private investigator who can help us, Carlos said, picking up the phone. I'll call him right away. Fernanda smiled, feeling that they were on the right track. The investigator, Mr. Roberto, agreed to meet with them the next day. We'll find out who's behind this, he assured them after hearing the story. I'll start tracking those transactions and see what I can uncover, he promised. Thank you, Mr. Roberto. This means so much to us, Carlos said, relieved. While the investigator worked, Fernanda and Carlos continued sifting through the documents. Look, I found a letter from the bank, Fernanda said, showing a letter. This could be useful to prove that you weren't involved, she added. Every piece of information helps, Carlos said, grateful. I couldn't have done this without you, Fernanda. Days passed, and the investigator brought good news. I was able to trace part of the money. It's in an account in the Cayman Islands, he said. We need a lawyer to start the recovery process, he explained. I know a lawyer who can help us, Fernanda said, picking up the phone. I'll schedule a meeting with her. The lawyer, Dr. Paula, was shocked by Carlos' story. This is a clear case of fraud. We'll sue the former business partner and try to recover as much of the money as possible, she said, confident. Thank you, Dr. Paula. This is a huge relief, Carlos said, emotional. We'll rebuild your life, Carlos, Fernanda assured him with a smile. At every step, the challenges seemed to multiply. The former business partner may try to complicate the process, the lawyer warned. We're prepared for that, Fernanda said, determined. We won't give up now, Carlos added firmly. Their determination grew stronger with each obstacle overcome. Amidst the legal confusion, Fernanda and Carlos found strength in each other. You've given me a new chance, Fernanda. I can never thank you enough, Carlos said, with gratitude. We're in this together. We'll win, Carlos, she responded, holding his hand. Their friendship and partnership were growing stronger with each passing day. With the legal process underway, Fernanda and Carlos began planning for the future. When we recover the money, what will you do? Fernanda asked. I want to start my life over, maybe open a small business, Carlos said, dreaming. And I'll be here to help you with whatever you need, Fernanda said, with a smile. Finally, after weeks of hard work, they received an exciting update. We've managed to freeze the former partner's accounts, the lawyer announced. We're on the right track to recover the money, she confirmed. Fernanda and Carlos hugged, emotional. This is just the beginning, Carlos. We still have a lot to accomplish, Fernanda said, her heart full of hope. Fernanda and Carlos were exhausted, but their determination had not wavered. After weeks of investigation, they finally found a crucial clue. Look at this, Carlos. I found correspondence between your former partner and an offshore bank, Fernanda said, excited. Carlos looked at the document, incredulous. This could be the proof we need to trace the money. I need to reach out to some of my old colleagues. They might be able to help us better understand this transaction, Carlos suggested. Great idea. The more information we have, the better, Fernanda agreed. They started making calls, trying to schedule meetings with people who could provide more details. At the first meeting, they met with João, a former accountant at the company. Carlos, it's good to see you, despite the circumstances, João said, shaking his hand. João, we need your help to understand these transactions. Can you take a look? Carlos asked, hopeful. João reviewed the documents and nodded. Of course, I'll do my best to help. While João investigated the financial details, Fernanda and Carlos went to speak with Ana, a former trusted assistant. Ana, we need information about our former partner's operations, Carlos explained. He was always private, but I could try to remember something that might help, Ana said, thoughtful. Anything could be crucial, Fernanda encouraged. After a few hours of conversation, Ana recalled an important detail. I remember he used to mention a contact at a specific bank. That might be helpful, she said, handing over a name and phone number. This is great, Ana. Thank you so much, exclaimed Carlos, feeling closer to the solution. João returned with new information. I found that the offshore account is linked to several shell companies. We need to take this to the authorities, he said. This is exactly what we needed. Fernanda responded, excited. Let's prepare everything to present to the court, Carlos added, more determined than ever. With the evidence in hand, Fernanda called the lawyer, Dr. Paula. Doctor, we have new evidence that could change everything, she explained. Great, bring it all to my office tomorrow. We'll prepare the case, the lawyer responded, confident. This could be the breakthrough we were waiting for, Carlos said, visibly relieved. The next day, Fernanda and Carlos went to Dr. Paula's office with a folder full of documents. These transactions and the information from Carlos' former colleagues are the key, Fernanda said, handing over the papers. We'll review everything and prepare a strong legal case, the lawyer affirmed. Carlos felt a new wave of hope. While the lawyer worked on the case, Fernanda and Carlos continued to gather as much support as possible. We need testimonies that prove the character of our former partner, Fernanda suggested. You're right. I'll reach out to a few more people who worked with us, Carlos said, already picking up the phone. Day by day, more and more people showed a willingness to help. Carlos, we're with you. This man has destroyed many lives, said a former business partner. Thank you, this means so much to me, Carlos responded, emotional. Fernanda watched, feeling proud of the support network they were building. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Are we ready? Fernanda asked, holding Carlos' hand. Yes, we are, he replied firmly. In the courtroom, they presented all the evidence and testimonies. Justice must be served, Dr. Paula declared with conviction. The tension was palpable, but their confidence in being on the right path was greater. After hours of deliberation, the judge finally delivered the verdict. Based on the evidence presented, I order the freezing and recovery of the diverted funds, he announced. Fernanda and Carlos embraced, emotional. We did it, Carlos. Justice has been served. Fernanda exclaimed. Thank you for never giving up on me, Carlos said, with tears in his eyes. And so, with renewed hope, they began planning a better future. Carlos couldn't believe it when the judge announced the recovery of a significant portion of his fortune. Fernanda, we did it, he exclaimed, hugging her tightly. I knew justice would be served, Carlos, Fernanda responded, with a radiant smile. The sense of victory was palpable, and they both felt that this was just the beginning. Back at Fernanda's house, they began planning the next steps. Now that we have part of the money back, we need to think about the future, Carlos said, still euphoric. Yes, but we can't stop here, Fernanda added. We have to use this victory to help other people who have gone or are going through similar situations. Carlos agreed, feeling a new purpose growing. Let's create a foundation or a non-profit organization. Something that can offer legal and financial support to victims of fraud, he suggested. That's a great idea, Carlos. We can use our experience to guide and help other people to get back on their feet, Fernanda said, excited. In the following days, they began sketching out the plans for the new organization. We need a name that reflects our mission, Fernanda said, thoughtful. How about renewal and hope? I think it captures what we want to do well, Carlos suggested. Perfect. Let's register the name and start working on the bylaws, Fernanda agreed. With the help of Carlos' former colleagues and new allies they made during the legal battle, the organization took shape quickly. We'll need volunteer lawyers, accountants, and other professionals, Fernanda said. I'm sure many of my contacts will be willing to help, Carlos replied, already making calls. The support network grew by the day. The first official meeting of Renewal and Hope was an emotional one. We're here because we believe in justice and solidarity, Carlos said, opening the meeting. We want to ensure that no one else goes through what we went through. We'll provide support and fight for the rights of all who have been wronged, Fernanda added, with a spark in her eyes. Applause filled the room. Cases started pouring in quickly. We received a request for help from a woman who lost everything in a pyramid scheme, Fernanda said, reading one of the emails. We'll investigate and see how we can assist, Carlos responded, determined. The sense of making a difference in people's lives was gratifying for both of them. One of the first cases they took on was that of a young businessman who had also been the victim of a scam. "Thank you for receiving us. I was desperate, not knowing where to turn," he said, emotional. "We're here for that. We'll do everything we can to recover your money and your dignity," Carlos assured him. Fernanda nodded, ready to start the fight. With each person they helped, the reputation of renewal and hope grew. "You have no idea how much you mean to me. Thank you for giving me a new chance," said one of the beneficiaries, with tears in her eyes. "This is what motivates us to keep going," Fernanda responded, emotional. Carlos smiled, feeling they were on the right path. Carlos and Fernanda knew that the journey was just beginning. "We still have a lot to do, but every victory gives us more strength," Carlos said, reflecting on the past months. "And each person we help is proof that we're doing the right thing," Fernanda added. Together, they were changing lives and building a legacy of hope. Over time, the organization expanded its activities, offering workshops and lectures on fraud prevention. "Education is the key to prevent more people from becoming victims," Fernanda said during one of the lectures. "We want to empower each of you to protect yourselves and help others," Carlos added, looking at the attentive audience. Their mission became clearer with each passing day. And so, with determination and a new purpose, Carlos and Fernanda continued to fight for justice. Renewal and hope became a beacon for those in need, and the friendship between Carlos and Fernanda grew even stronger. "Together, we are stronger," Carlos said, looking at Fernanda. "And this is just the first of many victories," she responded, with a confident smile. Fernanda and Carlos felt they needed to do more for the community. "What if we founded an organization to help homeless people?" Carlos suggested as they sipped their coffee. "I love the idea. We can provide meals and job opportunities. This can truly change lives," Fernanda responded, enthusiastic. They decided to start planning everything immediately. They gathered some friends and allies to discuss the details. "We need a name that conveys our mission," Fernanda said, jotting down ideas. "How about Hope and Dignity? I think it reflects well what we want to offer," Carlos suggested. Everyone agreed, and the name was decided. With an initial plan in hand, they began working on establishing the organization. The first step was to find a suitable location. "We have to find a space that can accommodate a community kitchen and a support center," Carlos said, looking through listings. "And it also needs to be accessible for those who really need it," Fernanda added. After a few weeks of searching, they found the perfect building in the city center. It was a large space, with an industrial kitchen and several rooms. With the location secured, they began the renovations and adaptations. "We'll need volunteers to help with painting and cleaning," Carlos said. "I'll post an announcement on social media. I'm sure many people will be willing to help," Fernanda responded, already typing on her phone. In a few days, dozens of volunteers showed up to lend a hand. On the day of the grand opening, the atmosphere was celebratory. "Today is a great day for all of us," Carlos said, emotional, as he cut the ribbon. "We're here to offer a second chance, a new hope," Fernanda added. Applauded by the attendees, they felt that all the effort had been worth it. The first meal was served that same day, and the gratitude in people's eyes was indescribable. Soon, the organization began offering more than just meals. We need to create vocational training programs, Fernanda suggested. I agree. We can partner with local businesses to offer courses and internships, Carlos said. With the help of business-owning friends and educational institutions, they launched the first professional training courses, from culinary to IT. Success stories started to emerge. I got a job thanks to the IT course, said João, one of the first beneficiaries. That's wonderful, João. We're so happy for you, Fernanda responded, emotional. And I thank you for believing in me, João added, with a hopeful smile. These stories further motivated the team. With the growth of the organization, the challenges also increased. We need more resources to continue expanding our services, Carlos said, concerned. We can organize charity events and seek more partnerships, Fernanda suggested. They decided to host a large charity dinner, where business owners and community members could contribute. The dinner was a success. We are deeply grateful for all the support we've received, Carlos said in his speech. Thanks to you, we can continue our mission of transforming lives, Fernanda added. The donations exceeded expectations, and the organization could expand its programs and serve even more people. The community demonstrated a great spirit of solidarity. Day by day, the organization was impacting more lives. It's amazing to see how an idea has transformed into something so grand, Carlos said, reflecting on the journey. And to think that it all started with the desire to make a difference, Fernanda replied. They knew there was still much to be done, but each small victory was motivation to keep going. Fernanda and Carlos never forgot the true purpose of their mission. We're here to provide opportunities and dignity to those who need it most, Fernanda said during a meeting. And that's what we'll continue to do, no matter what happens, Carlos added, with determination. They knew that together, they were capable of transforming the world, one life at a time. Fernanda and Carlos' story began to spread throughout the city, and soon the organization gained recognition. Did you see the article about us in the newspaper? Carlos asked, excited. I did. It's amazing how our story is inspiring so many people, Fernanda responded, with a smile. Increasingly, their work was being valued, and this brought a new wave of support and volunteers. Fernanda, who had started as a simple volunteer in a community soup kitchen, was now a co-founder of an institution that was transforming lives. It feels like just yesterday we were serving the first meals, she said, reminiscing. And look at where we are now. It's truly incredible, Carlos added, proud. The trajectory of both of them showed how dedication and compassion could make a difference. With the increase in recognition, more donations began to arrive. We received an anonymous donation of $50,000. Carlos exclaimed, surprised. That's wonderful. We can expand our programs and help even more people, Fernanda responded, already thinking about the next steps. The growth of the organization seemed limitless, and the financial support was crucial. In addition to donations, many people began to volunteer. I want to help in any way I can, said Anna, a new volunteer. All help is welcome, Anna. We'll find something that fits your skills, Fernanda said, grateful. It was heartwarming to see so many people willing to contribute to the cause. Carlos and Fernanda decided to take advantage of the moment to launch new projects. How about a mentorship program for homeless youth? Carlos suggested. I love the idea. We can connect these young people with professionals who can guide them, Fernanda agreed. With the help of the community, the mentorship program quickly took shape and began to bear fruit. Fernanda's dedication and Carlos' resilience were sources of inspiration. "You are living proof that it's possible to turn the tide," said João, one of the beneficiaries of the organization. "Thank you, João. But it's you who inspires us to keep going," Carlos responded, emotional. Each success story reinforced the mission of the organization and motivated everyone to continue working. One day, Fernanda was invited to give a lecture at a philanthropy conference. "I'm a little nervous," she confessed to Carlos. "You'll do great. Just speak from the heart, like you always do," he encouraged her. During the lecture, Fernanda shared her journey and the importance of compassion and courage. The impact was enormous, and many felt inspired to make a difference in their own communities. With the success of the lecture, more doors opened for the organization. "We've received invitations for partnerships with other institutions," Carlos said, excited. "That's incredible. The more people and organizations involved, the greater our impact will be," Fernanda responded. The support network continued to grow, and new opportunities arose every day. The recognition also brought challenges. "We need to ensure that the quality of our services remains high, even with growth," Fernanda said. "I agree. Let's focus on training and maintaining our values," Carlos responded. They knew that to continue transforming lives, they needed to keep the essence of the organization intact. With each new project and each new person helped, Fernanda and Carlos' mission strengthened. "No matter how much we grow, our goal will always be to help those in greatest need," Carlos said. "And we'll do it with the same passion and dedication as always," Fernanda added. Together, they were creating new hope for many. Fernanda and Carlos' journey was proof that with courage and compassion, it is possible to make a difference. "We're only just getting started," Fernanda said, looking to the future. "Yes, there is much more to be done," Carlos agreed, with a determined smile. And so, with a renewed hope in their hearts, they continued to transform the world around them. This was today's story. I hope you enjoyed it and felt a warm glow in your heart. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you and see you next time.